Shalom. This week we are reading Parashat Va'era, the second Torah portion in the book of Shemot, Exodus. We are already familiarizing ourselves with the landscape of the exile in Egypt and the bondage, servitude of the Jewish people to Pharaoh. You know, in the Haggadah, the classic text that we use to observe the Seder on the first night of Passover, we find there the statement, they say, if the Holy One, blessed be He, did not take our forefathers out of Egypt, then we and our children, and indeed even our children's children, would still be slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. So we express great joy and we give acknowledgement and thanksgiving to Hashem, to God, for having taken us out of Egypt. But this is actually kind of a strange point. The source of our joy, this is such a great thing that God took us out of Egypt, that if He wouldn't have taken our forefathers out, then we would still be there. Why is this so emphasized? The fact is, we're still in exile. This is considered to be a state of exile. It's another exile. So our forefathers were removed, were taken out with great salvation from Egypt. But the Haggadah says that if this wouldn't have happened, then we would still be there in Egypt. But the fact is, it's rather universally recognized that to some extent at least, we're still in a state of galut, in exile. We haven't yet merited to the ultimate redemption. So we're not slaves to Pharaoh, but to some extent we're still in exile. So what is this all about? You know, here in chapter 6 of Parashat Va'era, in verse 5, I think we find the key to understanding this. We find in this verse that God says, "And I have also heard the groans of the children of Israel, kept in bondage by the Egyptians, and I have remembered my covenant." And the Hebrew here is very significant. The word used here to express the state of Israel in Egypt is not just enslaved or in servitude, but that they are kept in bondage, not causing them to work, but kept in bondage. And you see, the Egyptian exile was not like all the others, but rather we, Israel, were kept in bondage. It was a total state of being. It was body and soul, not only the body of a slave to do someone else's work, someone else's bidding, but it was a state of entrapment of our very lives, our very soul. Our very souls were enslaved to this evil, all-encompassing machinery that was the Egypt of Pharaoh. And even if a taskmaster wasn't standing over someone, whipping him and giving him a particular duty at that time, we were constantly in this state of being kept in bondage, and this is why the Egyptian exile is known as the house of bondage. And this is the source for our great feeling of gratitude and praise of God having taken us out from there. And this is also the secret of why the Egyptian exile, as it were the mother of all exiles, on also a symbolic level, why it is more difficult than every other state of exile, because our forefathers in Egypt were not merely servants or slaves, but they were in total servitude. They were kept in bondage to the husk of Egypt, to the spirits of everything that Egypt really symbolizes, the promiscuity, the dismal and abysmal feeling of total despair and hopelessness and total spiritual disconnect that was the tool of entrapment of Egypt. This was the core experience of the spiritual enslavement in Egypt. And the same can be true on the level of an individual as well. A person could be enslaved to some degree to that aspect of Pharaoh in Egypt, and this is why we have a positive commandment to remember every day that God not only took us out of Egypt, but continues to do so if we make the attempt to leave Egypt behind. Because even today, there can be times in the life of a person, of an individual, when perhaps he's not a physical slave, but yet he may be in bondage to his own private tormentor to that side of his personality that he cannot bring under his own rule, under his own mastery, for the sake of serving God. And in that place, we still may be in the house of bondage. And this is what we really have to remember, that a free man can also remain in bondage. Just because you're not a slave doesn't mean that you're free.